Move your car, sweetheart. Reserved spaces aren't for people like you. Officer Dustin Parson recited the words like a man who had said them so many times they had stopped meaning anything. He stepped between Maggie and her own car, placing himself there as if the space belonged to him by default. Maggie Coster kept herself calm, the calm of a woman who had spent over 20 years learning exactly when to speak and when to let silence do the work in rooms that didn't deserve her composure. What Officer Parson didn't know was that Maggie Coster had built a career on people like him, and she outlasted everyone. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning was cold and gray, the kind of October morning that made everything feel heavy. The sky sat low over Hardin County, like it had somewhere better to be, but couldn't quite leave. Dead leaves skittered across the asphalt of the courthouse parking lot, pushed around by a wind that had no warmth left in it. Margaret Coster pulled her sedan into the lot at 8:47 a.m. and cut the engine. She sat for a moment. Just a moment. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, and she looked at the courthouse through the windshield, a squat brick building that looked older than it had any right to be. Chipped columns. A flagpole with a flag that needed replacing. A town that had convinced itself nothing here ever needed to change. She had been here before. Not this courthouse specifically, but this feeling. This particular kind of quiet that sat over small towns like Hardin County. The kind of quiet that wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that came from people learning it was safer not to speak. Maggie opened the car door and stepped out. She was 44 years old. She stood straight, dressed in a dark blazer over a white blouse, her natural hair framing her face without apology. No lanyard, no badge clipped to her hip, no announcement of any kind. She looked exactly like what she was. A professional woman arriving for a workday. Nothing more, nothing less. She reached back into the car and lifted her briefcase from the passenger seat. It was old. The leather had worn soft at the corners, and the brass clasp had lost most of its shine years ago. Her mother had given it to her the day she passed the bar exam, pressed it into her hands outside the testing center with both palms, and said, "Now you carry something in this that they can't take from you." Maggie carried it everywhere. She had parked in one of the reserved spaces near the side entrance, the ones marked for court officers. She was here in a quiet capacity this morning, observing a case her office had been tracking for the past several months. A civil rights complaint, case number 2024 CR 1187, Hardin County Sheriff's Department. It was a file full of names that deserved better than what they had gotten, and Maggie had come to watch, to listen, and to learn what she was dealing with before she decided what came next. She locked the car. She straightened her blazer with one hand. She did not know she was already being watched. Across the lot, a sheriff's department cruiser sat idling near the far entrance. Deputy Dustin Parson was behind the wheel, a clipboard on his knee, a pen in his hand. He was 38 years old and built like a man who had never once been told no. Broad shoulders, a jaw that jutted forward slightly, like it was always halfway into an argument. His uniform was pressed. His boots were clean. He had the easy, settled look of someone who had never once worried about consequences. He had been filling out paperwork for the last 20 minutes. Routine stuff. He wasn't paying attention to anything in particular. And then he was. His eyes moved across the lot and landed on Maggie. He watched her step out of her car, watched her lift the briefcase, watched her lock the door with a quiet click and turn toward the courthouse entrance without looking his direction even once. Something shifted in his face. It wasn't anything she did. She hadn't made noise, hadn't caused a scene. She had simply parked and stepped out, the same as dozens of other people who moved through this lot every single morning. But Dustin Parson was looking at the reserved space she had just parked in. Then he was looking at her. Then back at the space. His pen stopped moving. He set the clipboard on the passenger seat. He looked at her one more time. This woman in her dark blazer with her worn leather briefcase, walking like she had every right in the world to be exactly where she was. Dustin Parson had worked this county for 12 years. His uncle was the sheriff. He had parked in every reserved space in this lot, without a single question ever asked of him. He knew this courthouse. He knew these spaces. And he had decided, in the span of about 4 seconds, that he did not know her. He opened his door. He stepped out into the cold morning air, and he started walking. He called out before he even reached her. Hey. Just that one word. Not excuse me. Not ma'am. Just hey. Sharp and flat. The way you'd call out to someone you'd already decided wasn't worth more than one syllable. Maggie stopped walking. She turned around slowly. Dustin Parson crossed the last few feet of the parking lot, with his thumbs hooked in his belt and his chin lifted. He looked her up and down the way people do when they've already made up their mind and the looking is just for show. You can't park there, he said. Maggie held his gaze. Her voice was even. These spaces are reserved for court officers. Yeah. He nodded slowly, like she'd said something stupid. Court officers. Not you. I am a court officer. A short laugh escaped him. Not a real laugh. The kind that was meant to make her feel small. Is that right? He said it like a statement, not a question. His eyes moved over her again. The blazer, the briefcase, the way she was standing. And whatever he was looking for, he apparently didn't find it. I'm going to need you to move this vehicle. Right now. Maggie did not move. Something flickered across Parsons' face. Surprise, maybe. Or irritation. People in this parking lot moved when Dustin Parson told them to move. That was just how it worked. Did you hear me? His voice dropped lower. Move! The vehicle. I heard you, Maggie said calmly. She turned slightly and reached for her briefcase, which was resting against the side of the car. I have documentation that will clarify. He moved fast. Before her fingers could close around the handle, Parson stepped forward and snatched the briefcase off the car. He pulled it away in one sharp motion and held it out to his side, up and away from her like she was a child reaching for something she hadn't earned. His eyes dared her to try to take it back. She didn't. Step away from the car, he said. A small crowd had started to gather. It happened the way it always happens, quietly, slowly, one person stopping, then another, then a third, until a loose half-circle of courthouse employees and morning visitors had formed near the entrance. Nobody said anything. They just watched. Near the edge of the group, a young black woman stood with her lanyard still swinging from the speed at which she'd stopped walking. Tanya, 24 years old, courthouse clerk, second year on the job. She recognized immediately what she was looking at. Her hand went into her pocket and came out with her phone. She didn't say a word. She just raised it. Parson hadn't noticed her. He had stepped in closer to Maggie now, close enough that she would have had to move him out of the way to reach her own car door. The briefcase still held away from her at his side. He was bigger than her. He wanted her to feel that. You got a real problem with following simple instructions. You know that? I am following your instructions, Maggie said. I am simply asking you to allow me to produce identification. It's in that briefcase. Oh, you're asking me? He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. See, that's real cute. But what I see right now is a woman who parked where she doesn't belong and is now giving me grief about it. And that tells me we've got a problem. He looked back at the crowd, like he was performing for them, then back to her. Suspicious behavior. Failure to comply. You want to keep going? I would like to show you my credentials, and I would like you to put your hands behind your back. She did not fight him. That was the thing the crowd would remember later. She did not argue any further. She did not pull away. She stood straight and let him take her wrists, and she kept her eyes forward while he snapped the cuffs on. And the only sound was the metal clicking into place and the wind moving across the parking lot. Parson turned her toward the cruiser. Her briefcase swung from his other hand. Before he opened the door, Maggie spoke one more time. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You're going to want to open that briefcase," she said, "before you put me in that car." He laughed out loud this time. A real one, wide and easy, like she'd just told the best joke he'd heard all week. "Lady," he said, pulling the cruiser door open. "I don't need to open anything." He put her in the back seat. He tossed her briefcase onto the front passenger seat without so much as a glance at it. He got behind the wheel, and he drove. The courthouse annex processing area smelled like old coffee and fluorescent lights. It was a small room, a front desk with a computer that looked 10 years past its usefulness, a row of plastic chairs bolted to the wall, a bulletin board covered in papers nobody had updated in months, the kind of room that existed purely for paperwork, for turning people into case numbers and moving them along. Maggie sat in one of the plastic chairs with her hands cuffed behind her back and her spine perfectly straight. She did not slump. She did not fidget. She watched the room the way she had watched hundreds of courtrooms across 22 years, quietly, carefully, missing nothing. Parson dropped her briefcase on the front desk with a careless thud and settled in at the computer. He was already composing the arrest report in his head, she could tell. He had the relaxed, satisfied look of a man who believed the paperwork was just a formality. The second deputy appeared from a back hallway. Older, maybe 55. He had a soft face and the rounded shoulders of someone who had spent decades trying to take up as little space as possible. His name tag read Hendricks. He took one look at Maggie sitting cuffed in the chair, and then looked at Parson, and something moved behind his eyes, a question he didn't ask out loud. "Need you to run inventory," Parson said, not looking up from the keyboard. "Briefcase and whatever's in her pockets." Hendricks nodded. He moved to the desk. He set down a clipboard and an inventory form and reached for the briefcase. The clasp opened with a soft click. Hendricks lifted the lid. He stood there for a moment, completely still. His eyes moved slowly across the contents. Then they moved again, like he was rereading something to make sure he had it right. He set the inventory clipboard down without filling anything in. Inside the briefcase, sitting in plain view, was a leather credential wallet. Black. Official. He picked it up and opened it. Behind a clear plastic window was a gold badge. Below the badge, printed on cardstock with the state seal embossed in the corner, were the words, "State Attorney, 9th Judicial Circuit." He turned the credential wallet over. There was a second card behind it, an appointment letter. The signature at the bottom belonged to the governor. Behind that was a Department of Justice observer's credential with Maggie's photograph, and underneath all of it, a manila folder. The tab was labeled in clean black type, Hardin County Sheriff's Dept. Civil Rights Complaint File, Case No. 2224 CR 1187. Hendricks went pale. He didn't speak. He didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then he straightened slowly, turned toward Parson, and held up the badge. Just held it up. Didn't say a word. Didn't have to. The keyboard went silent. Parson looked up. He looked at the badge, then at the credential wallet, then at the briefcase, still open on the desk, with the governor's letter sitting right there in plain sight, then at Maggie. The color left his face the way water leaves a bathtub. Slow, then all at once. The room went absolutely quiet. The hum of the fluorescent light overhead suddenly felt very loud. Maggie let the silence sit for exactly as long as she wanted it to. Then she looked at Parson. Not with anger, not with triumph, just with the steady, level gaze of someone who had been waiting for this moment since the second he snatched her briefcase off that car. "I've been patient," she said. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. "Now, uncuff me." Parson didn't move right away. He stood there with his jaw tight and his ears going red at the tips, and for just a moment he looked like he was calculating whether there was any version of this that didn't end the way it was clearly about to end. There wasn't. He came around the desk. He uncuffed her without a word. Maggie stood. She rolled her wrists once, slowly, and straightened her blazer with both hands. She crossed to the desk and retrieved her credential wallet, her appointment letter, her DOJ credential, and her civil rights complaint file. She placed each item back in the briefcase carefully, the way you pack something that matters. She closed the clasp. She looked at Hendricks. "Thank you, Deputy Hendricks," she said. "I appreciate your professionalism." Hendricks gave a small, stiff nod. He looked like a man who desperately wanted to be somewhere else. Maggie picked up her briefcase. She did not look at Dustin Parson again. She walked out. The cold hit her the moment she stepped outside. Maggie stopped on the bottom step of the courthouse annex and pulled in a slow breath. The air was sharp and clean after the stale warmth of that processing room. She stood there for just a moment, briefcase in hand, and let the morning settle around her. She had known, walking into that room, how it would end. She had known the moment Hendricks reached for that clasp. But knowing something in your head and living through it in your body are two different things entirely. And her hands, steady the whole time inside, steady through every second of it, now had the faintest tremor in them that she squeezed away by tightening her grip on the briefcase handle. She was fine. She was always fine. She started walking. "Miss Coster." The voice came from her left. Maggie turned. A woman was moving toward her from the edge of the parking lot, with the quick, purposeful stride of someone who had been waiting and didn't want to waste another second of it. She was in her late 50s, full-figured, wearing a dark wool coat with a city councilwoman's pin on the lapel. Her face was serious and tight, with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. Something in between. "Councilwoman Olson," Maggie said. Beatrice Olson stopped in front of her and looked her over once. The blazer, the briefcase, the cuffs no longer on her wrists, and exhaled through her nose. "Tanya called me from inside the building," she said. "She got the whole thing on her phone. It's already going around on social media." Maggie nodded slowly. "How much?" "Enough." Olson's jaw tightened. "People saw it, Maggie." A deputy handcuffing a black woman in a courthouse parking lot in broad daylight. "It's moving fast." Maggie looked out across the lot for a moment. She thought about Parson back inside, sitting at that keyboard, the red still fading from his ears. She thought about how easily he had grabbed that briefcase, how comfortable he had looked doing it, how practiced. "You should report it through channels," Olson said. "File the complaint. Let it move through the process. You could be home by tonight, and nobody could blame you for stepping back from this one." She paused. "That's what I'd tell you to do if I thought for 1 second that's what you should do." Maggie looked at her. "But—" Olson reached into the inside pocket of her coat and pulled out a file folder. It was thin, maybe a dozen pages, but she held it the way people hold things that weigh more than they look. She held it out. Maggie took it. The name on the top page was Destiny McAdam, 19 years old. The incident report was dated 8 months ago. A spring morning. A different parking lot. The same deputy. The same language in the report. suspicious behavior, failure to comply, obstruction. Maggie read it, standing right there on the courthouse steps. Olson waited. Destiny McAdam had been working part-time at a grocery store. She had a 2-year-old daughter and a mother who watched the baby while she worked. She had no prior record, no lawyer, and no money to get one. A public defender had told her to take the deal. She did. A misdemeanor conviction for obstruction of justice. It cost her a housing assistance voucher she had waited 14 months to receive. It cost her the job. It cost her the kind of clean record that opens doors instead of closes them. Destiny McAdam was 19 years old, and Dustin Parson had taken a wrecking ball to her life over a parking dispute. Maggie turned the page. There was another name, then another. Olson had 11 of them, paper-clipped together. 11 complaints spanning 3 years. Mostly black women. Mostly young. Mostly low income. The details shifted slightly from case to case. Different locations, different dates. But the shape of each one was identical. The same deputy, the same pretextual language, the same pressure funneling people toward plea deals they couldn't afford to fight. 11 people who had no briefcase to open. No badge inside, no governor's letter. Nothing but their own word against a man with a uniform and an uncle who ran the department. Maggie stood very still. She read every page. When she finished, she closed the folder and held it at her side. The wind moved across the parking lot and rattled the dead leaves against the base of the flagpole. She looked at Olson. "Get me a conference room," she said. The conference room was small and smelled like old carpet. A rectangular table. 6 chairs nobody had pushed in properly. A whiteboard on the far wall with a phone number written in marker that had never been erased. One window looking out at the courthouse parking lot. The same lot where, 3 hours ago, Maggie had been pressed against her own car in handcuffs. She didn't look at the window. Olson had arranged the room through a contact inside the courthouse. A sympathetic clerk who handed over a key without asking questions. Maggie set her briefcase on the table, opened it, and spread all 11 complaint files across the surface in a single row. Then she sat down, pulled her legal pad in front of her, uncapped her pen, and started at the beginning. She read slowly. That was her way. Some lawyers skimmed for the headline and moved on. Maggie read like every word was evidence, because in her experience, it usually was. The first file was Destiny McAdam's. She had already read it outside on the courthouse steps, but she read it again now, slower, taking notes this time. She wrote down the date, the location, the specific language Parson had used in his report, suspicious behavior, failure to comply, obstruction. She underlined each phrase and circled them one by one. Then she opened the second file. A 23-year-old woman named Kelly Tarrant, arrested 14 months ago in the courthouse parking garage. Different level, different row. Same 3 phrases in Parsons' report. Word for word, like he had copied and pasted from one document to the next. Kelly had been cited for trespassing in a public parking structure. She had been on her way to file for a restraining order against an ex-boyfriend. The charge was later dropped, but not before she had missed 2 shifts at her job and lost it. Maggie wrote identical language, Report 1 and Report 2. She drew a line connecting them. Third file. A 41-year-old woman named Scarlett Radcliffe, a mother of 3 who had come to the courthouse to attend her son's hearing. Parson had approached her in the main lot, told her she was parked in a fire lane. She was not, and escalated when she questioned him. The charge had been reduced to a warning, but the arrest itself was on her record. Her employer had seen it during a routine check-in and placed her on probationary status. She had been walking the tightrope ever since. One by one, Maggie worked through all 11. By the time she reached the last file, The light through the window had shifted from morning gray to the flat, pale gold of a November afternoon. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't noticed. Her legal pad had 3 pages of notes. Arrows connecting names to dates to locations. Circled phrases that appeared again and again across 3 years of reports. A column on the right side of the page with a single header she had written and underlined twice. Pattern. Because that's what this was. Not a series of bad days or poor judgment calls. Not a deputy who lost his temper once or twice. This was a system. A deliberate, repeating loop. Find a black woman alone. Manufacture a reason to engage. Escalate until she either complied or gave him a justification to arrest. Then funnel her toward a plea deal that would follow her for the rest of her life. Over and over, for 3 years, in a county where his uncle ran the department, and nobody reviewed his reports closely enough to notice what was sitting right there in plain language. 11 names. 11 lives with chunks taken out of them. And those were just the ones who had filed complaints. Maggie set her pen down and looked at the row of files spread across the table. She thought about her mother, about the briefcase, about the worn leather and the brass clasp, and the day Priscilla Coster had pressed it into her hands and said, "Now you carry something they can't take from you." She thought about all the years she had spent building something inside that briefcase, credentials and appointments, and the kind of documented authority that had made Dustin Parsons' ears go red this morning. And she thought about Destiny McAdam, 19 years old with no briefcase, no badge, nothing inside to open that would make a man like that go pale. She picked up her phone and called Dwayne. He answered on the second ring. "I need you in Hardin County first thing tomorrow morning," she said. "Bring a blank subpoena list." A short pause. Then, "How many names?" Maggie looked at the 11 files on the table. "Start with 11, she said, "and bring extra paper." She hung up, pulled the nearest file back toward her, and began writing notes in the margins. Dwayne Alderman arrived at 7:52 a.m. with 2 coffees and a legal pad that already had handwriting on it. He was 29 years old, lean and sharp-eyed, with the kind of quiet intensity that made people underestimate him right up until the moment they couldn't anymore. He had worked for Maggie for 3 years. In that time, she had watched him walk into rooms full of people twice his age and twice his rank, and hold his ground without flinching. She trusted him the way you trust someone who has never once given you a reason not to. He set one of the coffees in front of her without being asked, and dropped into the chair across the table. "You sleep?" he said. "Some." She picked up the coffee. "Enough." He looked at the 11 files still spread across the table from the night before, and nodded slowly, the way he did when he was already 3 steps into processing something. "Where do we start?" Maggie slid her legal pad across to him. 3 pages of notes. Arrows. Circles. The column on the right that said "Pattern" in underlined capital letters. Dwayne read it without speaking. His jaw tightened once, halfway down the first page, and didn't loosen again. They spent the morning building the subpoena list together. Maggie called out the documents she needed. Parsons' full arrest record going back 4 years, every court transcript connected to the 11 cases, disposition reports, plea agreement paperwork, any internal review or supervisor sign-off on Parsons' reports. Dwayne wrote it all down in his clean, precise handwriting and started cross-referencing case numbers against the complaint files. By noon, they had a list that covered 2 full pages. By 1 o'clock, the subpoenas were drafted. Then Dwayne started making calls. The first call lasted 4 minutes. A woman named Gracie Sandler, case number 6 on Maggie's list, arrested 11 months ago for allegedly blocking a handicapped space. The charge had been dismissed, but not before Gracie had spent a night in county holding. She listened to Dwayne explain who he worked for and why he was calling. Then she said, very quietly, that she appreciated it, but she couldn't get involved. She had a job now. A good one. She couldn't risk it. Dwayne thanked her and moved to the next name. The second call lasted 90 seconds. A woman named Taylor Hall, who said nothing except "Don't call here again," and hung up. The third didn't answer. The fourth went straight to voicemail. The fifth answered, listened for 30 seconds, and said she had already tried to fight it once, and it had cost her more than the original charge ever did. She wasn't going through that again. She was sorry. Dwayne kept his voice level through every call. Patient, professional. He didn't push. He didn't plead. He wrote down each response in the margin beside the name and moved to the next one. By mid-afternoon, he had worked through 9 of the 11 names. 2 brief conversations with women who were willing to talk, but not to testify. 7 who wouldn't engage at all. The fear in their voices wasn't loud. It wasn't crying or anger. It was quieter than that. It was the flat, worn-down tone of people who had already learned what happened when they spoke up in Hardin County. Maggie sat across the table and listened to every call. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to take the phone. She just listened and wrote notes and let the weight of it land where it needed to land. The 10th name was Destiny McAdam. Dwayne dialed. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. He left a calm, brief message, his name, who he worked for, and a number to call back. She didn't call back. He tried again an hour later. Voicemail again. He left a second message, shorter this time. By early evening, Destiny still hadn't responded. Dwayne leaned back in his chair and looked at Maggie. She's the strongest case we've got. I know. Without her as the lead plaintiff, the others are harder to build around. I know that too. Maggie tapped her pen against the legal pad twice. Keep trying. Try again tonight and first thing tomorrow. If she still won't pick up, she stopped, made a decision. Then I'll go myself. Dwayne nodded. He gathered his notes and reached for his coat. Outside, the last of the daylight was fading fast over Hardin County, turning the courthouse windows amber and then gray. He left for his motel. Maggie stayed. She pulled the first batch of subpoenaed documents toward her, clicked her pen, and started reading under the single yellow light of the conference room desk lamp. Thursday morning came in cold and colorless. Maggie was already at the conference table when the light outside shifted from black to gray. She had a fresh legal pad, a cup of coffee from the vending machine down the hall that tasted like hot brown water, and 3 new documents from the overnight subpoena returns spread open in front of her. She was deep inside the second one when her personal cell phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at the screen. Sheriff Rocky Parson, Hardin County. She looked at it for 1 full ring. Then she picked up. "Mr. Parson," she said. His voice was warm. That was the first thing. Not defensive, not clipped. Warm, like a man calling an old acquaintance to smooth over a minor misunderstanding. He had a deep, unhurried drawl that had probably charmed its way through 40 years of county politics without ever once working too hard. "Ms. Coster," he said, "I am so glad I caught you. I hope I'm not interrupting your morning." "Not at all." "Good, good." A small pause, perfectly timed. "I wanted to reach out personally. What happened in that parking lot on Tuesday, I want you to know that is not a reflection of how this department operates. Dustin is a good officer. He made a judgment call under pressure and it went sideways. I think we can both agree that these things happen." Maggie said nothing. She let the silence stretch just long enough to be noticeable. Parson filled it smoothly. "Now, I understand there may be some media attention around this, and I completely respect your position. If there's a formal process you need to follow, I support that fully. I just want to make sure we're communicating directly, person to person, before this gets bigger than it needs to be." "I appreciate that," Maggie said. I thought you would. His voice warmed another degree. Here's my concern, and I'm being honest with you because I think you're a smart woman who understands how these things work. You came to Hardin County to observe a civil rights matter, an important one, I'd say, and I would hate to see the legitimacy of that case clouded by what could look like a personal grievance on your part. He let that land. People will say you had an agenda coming in. You know how they talk. There it was. Maggie kept her voice even. I understand your concern. I knew you would. Another pause, and when he spoke again, the warmth had a new texture to it. Something harder underneath, like a handshake with too much grip. Dustin's been with this department for 12 years. Good record. Good family. I'd hate to see a misunderstanding turn into something that damages a career and muddies waters that didn't need muddying, especially when the person stirring those waters is, and I mean this respectfully, still fairly early in a very promising career. There it was again, wrapped in a compliment this time. Fairly early in a very promising career. She was 44 years old. She had been practicing law since she was 22. She had made state attorney before most of his deputies had finished their probationary periods. But to Rocky Parson, speaking from behind 12 years of his nephew's unchecked behavior, she was a young woman who didn't yet understand how Hardin County worked. Maggie looked at the subpoenaed documents spread in front of her. 3 years of arrest reports with identical language. 11 women with their lives quietly taken apart. I hear you clearly, Sheriff, she said. Thank you for taking the time to call. Of course, of course. The relief in his voice was almost imperceptible, but it was there. He thought he had landed it. I'm glad we could. Have a good day. She ended the call. She set the phone face down on the table. For a moment she just sat there, looking at the wall. She thought about his voice, the warmth that wasn't warm, the respect that wasn't respectful, the way he had called her smart in the same breath he used to suggest she was too inexperienced to understand what she was looking at. She had been getting that her whole career. She would probably keep getting it. She picked up her pen. Dwayne appeared in the doorway a minute later with his coat still on, his own legal pad under his arm, ready for the day. Maggie looked up at him. Expand the subpoena list, she said. Dwayne uncapped his pen without missing a beat. She was already back inside the documents before he sat down. The news vans showed up just after lunch. Maggie saw them from the conference room window. 2 white trucks with satellite dishes on their roofs pulling into the courthouse lot, parking without asking anyone's permission the way news crews always did. A woman in a red blazer climbed out of the first one and started talking to a producer while a cameraman set up behind her, framing the courthouse entrance in his shot. Maggie watched for a moment, then turned back to her documents. Her phone started ringing 20 minutes later. Not her personal cell. Her office line, forwarded to her work phone. She let it go to the assistant. Then it rang again. Then again. At 2:15, her communications director, a careful, soft-spoken man named Genesis, called her directly. It's gone regional, he said. 3 local affiliates, 1 cable pickup. The Tanya footage is everywhere. A short pause. There's also a segment. What kind of segment? Genesis hesitated in the way people hesitate when they're deciding how much padding to put around something before they hand it to you. A pundit. Conservative. He's been running it on rotation since noon. Dwayne pulled it up on his laptop and turned the screen toward her. The man on screen was red-faced and loud. The kind of loud that wasn't about volume but about certainty. The certainty of a man who had never once been wrong about anything. At least, not in his own mind. He sat behind a desk with a chyron under his name that read, Common Sense Commentary. Here's what nobody wants to say, the man was saying, leaning forward like he was sharing a secret with the camera. This woman, this state attorney, parked in a reserved space, and did not immediately identify herself to a law enforcement officer. That's it. That is the whole story. Deputy Parson was doing his job. He held up one finger. Now I've looked into this Coster woman, 44 years old, relatively new to this role. And what I'm seeing here is someone who let a routine interaction get personal, and now wants to use the power of her office to go after a 12-year veteran because her feelings got hurt. He shook his head slowly, performing disappointment. Is this really what we want from our prosecutors? Someone this green, this reactive? Dwayne closed the laptop. The room was quiet for a second. Green? Maggie said. Yeah. She nodded once. Then she went back to her documents. Genesis called back at 3 o'clock. His voice had the tight, careful quality of someone walking across ice. Maggie, I really think we need a statement. Something measured. Make it about the systemic issue, not about you personally. Don't give them the personal angle. Don't let them frame it as a grudge. I hear you, Genesis. I know you do. He stopped, started again. Don't make it personal. That's all I'm saying. Keep it clean. She thanked him and ended the call. Don't make it personal. She had been hearing that sentence since she was 22 years old. Said with kindness, most of the time. Said by people who genuinely meant well. But it had followed her through every slight, every dismissal, every room she had walked into and been looked at like she had the wrong face for the job. Don't make it personal, Maggie. Keep it professional. Stay composed. Don't give them a reason. She had followed that advice for over 2 decades. She had stayed composed in rooms that had no business asking her to be composed. She had kept it clean, when clean was the very last thing the situation deserved. She closed the file in front of her and called her mother. Priscilla Coster picked up on the 3rd ring. 72 years old, and her voice still had the same quality it had always had. Unhurried, grounded, like bedrock that had never once considered shifting. I saw the news, Priscilla said, before Maggie could start. Genesis wants me to put out a statement. Keep it impersonal. A quiet beat. Then her mother said, They've been telling you that since you were 22 years old. Every single time something happened to you, don't make it personal, Maggie. Keep your head down. Stay professional. Another pause. You want to know something, baby? Tell me. It was always personal. Every single time. They just never let you say so. Maggie sat with that for a moment. She let it settle all the way down. Okay, Mama. Go do your work. She hung up. She sat still for exactly 10 seconds. Then she pulled the nearest file back in front of her, picked up her pen, and got back to it with a focus that was sharper and quieter, and more dangerous than anything she had felt all day. Friday morning. Dwayne was already in his chair when Maggie arrived, and his expression told her everything before he opened his mouth. Destiny McAdam called back, he said. Finally. And? He looked down at his notepad. Read it back exactly as it had been said to him. She said, and I'm quoting, I don't care how fancy your boss is. Fancy don't protect people like me. He set the pad down. Then she hung up. Maggie stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked at the window. At the courthouse lot outside, gray and cold under a flat November sky. Give me her address, she said. Dwayne looked up. You want me to? No. She held out her hand. Just the address. Destiny McAdam lived in a 2-story apartment complex on the eastern edge of Hardin County. The kind of building that had been functional once and had been declining ever since without anyone deciding to do anything about it. The exterior paint had gone from white to the color of old dishwater. The parking lot had potholes that had been filled with gravel instead of asphalt. A rusted metal mailbox station near the entrance had 3 doors hanging open and one missing entirely. Maggie parked straightened her blazer, and walked up the exterior staircase to the second floor. She knocked on apartment 214. Nothing for a moment. Then the sound of movement inside, something soft and small skittering across a hard floor. The shuffle of adult footsteps. The quiet that meant someone was standing on the other side of the door, deciding whether to open it. The door opened 4 inches. A security chain caught it there. One eye looked out at Maggie. Young, tired, wary in the specific way of someone who has learned that unexpected knocks on the door rarely bring good news. "Destiny McAdam?" Maggie said. "Who are you?" "My name is Margaret Coster. I'm the state attorney for the 9th Judicial Circuit." She kept her voice quiet. "No authority in it, just honesty. I'm not here to serve you anything. I'm not here to make demands. I'd just like to talk, if you're willing. That's all." A long pause. The door closed. The chain slid free. The door opened all the way. Destiny McAdam was 19 years old and looked like someone carrying weight she hadn't agreed to carry. She was slight, dressed in a gray sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled back. She had dark circles under her eyes that didn't come from one bad night. They came from months of them. Behind her, a little girl, maybe 2 years old, in pink socks, was pushing a plastic toy across the linoleum floor of the kitchen, completely unconcerned with any of it. Destiny didn't invite Maggie in. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her chin lifted in the particular way of someone who is tired and proud in equal measure and refuses to let the tired win. "My investigator said you want me to testify," Destiny said. "I want to talk to you first." "About what?" "About how I should trust the system? About how this time it'll be different?" Her voice wasn't loud. It was flat and honest, and it carried the weight of everything that file had told Maggie 3 days ago. "Lady, I took that deal because a lawyer I couldn't afford told me I had no chance. I lost my voucher. I lost my job. I got a record now that follows me around like a shadow everywhere I go." She shook her head. "What exactly is there left to talk about?" Maggie didn't argue. She didn't reach for reassurance or paint a picture brighter than the one they were both standing in. She just spoke plainly. "Your case is the strongest of 11, she said. 11 women that Parson arrested the same way he arrested you. Same language in every report. Same pressure toward plea deals. Same pattern, repeated over 3 years in a department where nobody was looking closely enough to stop it. Destiny was listening. She was pretending not to, but she was. Without you," Maggie continued, "those 11 cases are 11 separate complaints. Hard to connect. Easy to dismiss one by one." She paused. "With you as the lead, your documentation, your timeline, your collateral losses, 11 names become a pattern. A pattern becomes a case. A case becomes a verdict. And a verdict becomes a permanent record that follows Dustin Parson for the rest of his life." The little girl in pink socks toddled to the kitchen doorway and looked up at her mother. Destiny looked down at her daughter for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Not resolve exactly, not yet. Something quieter than that. Something that had been waiting for a reason. She looked back up at Maggie. "Okay," she said. The next 3 weeks moved the way good legal work always moves. Quietly, relentlessly, without fanfare. Maggie and Dwayne built the case the way you build anything that has to hold weight. One document at a time. One verified fact stacked on top of another. The subpoenaed records came back in batches, and each batch added another layer to the pattern already visible in Maggie's margin notes. Parsons' identical report language, his escalation tactics, the consistent targeting, the pipeline from arrest to plea deal that had run like clockwork for 3 years without a single internal flag. 4 of the 11 complainants eventually agreed to participate after multiple conversations with Dwayne. Not testify, not yet, but participate, provide statements, allow their case files to be formally incorporated. It wasn't everything. It was enough to move. Destiny McAdams signed her formal complainant agreement on a Wednesday afternoon. She did it at her kitchen table with her daughter asleep in the next room. She signed it without ceremony, without drama. She just picked up the pen and signed it and slid it back across the table. On a gray Monday morning, 3 weeks after the parking lot, Maggie's office filed formal charges against Deputy Dustin Parson. Civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C., Parv 1983, misconduct in office, abuse of authority. All 11 complainants named. Destiny McAdams listed as lead plaintiff. The filing was 47 pages long, and every single page was airtight. By noon, Councilwoman Olson was standing on the courthouse steps in front of cameras. She read from a prepared statement in a clear, steady voice that carried across the whole plaza. Behind her, a small crowd had gathered. Courthouse employees, local residents, a handful of people whose names were in that 47-page document. 3 national civil rights organizations issued statements of support before the afternoon was out. 2 of them sent representatives to Hardin County by the following morning. By end of day, Dustin Parson had been placed on administrative leave, with pay. His union filed a grievance before dinner time. For 48 hours, it felt like something had finally cracked open. Like the air in Hardin County was different, lighter. Like 11 names on a list had become something that could not be quietly buried or ignored or shuffled into a drawer somewhere. Maggie let herself feel it for exactly 1 evening. She ordered food to the conference room, ate it while reviewing the next round of documents, and allowed herself 1 moment, just one, of something close to relief. Then the floor fell out. It happened fast, the way bad things always do when someone with resources decides to fight back. The first blow came on a Wednesday morning. Retired Judge Luke Callister, a man Maggie had never personally met, filed a sworn legal affidavit claiming that at a Bar Association dinner 6 months prior, Maggie had expressed clear personal animosity toward the Hardin County Sheriff's Department. The affidavit described her as emotionally invested and professionally compromised. Before Maggie had finished reading it, the sheriff's legal team filed an emergency motion in court, a motion to have her recused from the case entirely on grounds of personal bias. The motion cited her own arrest as evidence of a conflict of interest. It argued that a prosecutor who had been personally targeted by the defendant could not be trusted to pursue justice objectively. It was the arrest they had committed against her, and now they were using it as a weapon. The second blow came the same afternoon. Someone had leaked Destiny McAdams' sealed juvenile record to a right-wing local blog. A shoplifting charge from when Destiny was 15 years old, 4 years ago. A kid in a store. The blog ran it under a headline that called Destiny a career criminal and described her as Maggie's hand-picked pawn, a manufactured victim chosen for maximum media impact. By evening, the piece had been shared hundreds of times. Destiny called Dwayne at 9 p.m. Her voice was tight and fractured, right at the edge of breaking. She said she couldn't do it. She said she wanted to withdraw. Dwayne called Maggie immediately. Midnight. The conference room was silent except for the hum of the overhead light. Maggie sat alone at the table, the recusal motion face up in front of her. Destiny's name printed at the top of the complaint document beside it. If she was removed, the case went to a junior prosecutor. It would be delayed, weakened, and buried under motions until it quietly disappeared. 11 names would go back to meaning nothing. She stared at the motion. She didn't move for a long time. The courthouse conference room had no clock on the wall. Maggie had noticed that on the first day and hadn't thought about it since. Now, at some point deep in the middle of the night, she was aware of it in a different way. The absence of a clock meant the only way to measure time was by how much of the legal pad she had filled and how cold her coffee had gotten. Both answers were a lot. She had been working through the recusal motion line by line, building her counter-arguments in the margin the way she had been building arguments her whole career. Methodically, without rushing, one solid brick at a time. The motion was well constructed. She would give them that. Whoever had drafted it knew what they were doing. They had taken the most damaging fact available, that Dustin Parson had personally arrested her, and reframed it not as evidence of his misconduct, but as evidence of her bias. It was dirty. It was also smart. She was still staring at page 4 when her phone lit up. Dwayne, 3:02 a.m. She picked up. "Talk to me." His voice had the particular energy of someone who had not slept and didn't care because he had found something. "Callister," he said. "Luke Callister. I've been digging since midnight." Maggie sat up straighter. "His son-in-law," Dwayne said. "Guy named Miles Warden. I pulled the department roster. Warden is an active sergeant in the Hardin County Sheriff's Department. Has been for 6 years. Maggie wrote the name down. That's not all. She could hear him turning pages on the other end of the line. Rocky Parson does an annual fundraiser. Every spring. Been doing it for at least 5 years as far back as the public financial disclosures go. Callister shows up in the donor records 4 years running. Not huge amounts, but he's there. On the record. Documented. Maggie's pen didn't stop moving. And then there's this. Dwayne paused the way he paused when he was about to hand her the thing that mattered most. I pulled the case numbers on all 11 complainants. Cross-referenced the presiding judges on the original hearings. Another pause. Callister presided over 2 of them. Cases 4 and 7 on your list. He signed off on both plea agreements. The pen stopped. Maggie looked at what she had just written. Callister's son-in-law in the department. Callister's name in the donor records. Callister's signature on 2 of the original plea deals. And now, Callister's sworn affidavit, filed within 48 hours of formal charges being brought, claiming she was too personally compromised to prosecute. Luke Callister was not a disinterested retired judge offering an honest professional assessment. Luke Callister was a man with his hands inside this thing up to the elbow, and he had filed that affidavit because he was afraid of what a full trial would uncover. His affidavit wasn't bias. It wasn't a legal maneuver. It was obstruction of justice. "Dwayne," she said, "I need every one of those findings sourced and documented before dawn. Financial records, department roster, case dockets, everything with a paper trail attached to it. Already pulling it. Every connection needs to be bulletproof. If we walk into that hearing with this and one thing doesn't hold, they'll use it to discredit the rest." "Understood." A brief pause. "Maggie." He said her name the way he only did when he meant it. "We've got him." She believed him. But belief wasn't enough for what came next. Paper was enough. Documentation was enough. The kind of sourced, verified, exhibit-labeled evidence that could be placed on a bench in open court and withstand anything they threw at it. "Get it done," she said. "I'll be here." She ended the call. She looked at the time on her phone. 3:09 a.m. She thought about Rocky Parson's voice on the phone 3 days ago. Warm and unhurried. Fairly early in a very promising career. She thought about Luke Callister signing plea agreements for 2 of the women on her list, and then filing an affidavit to stop the person trying to get them justice. She thought about all of it, the whole interconnected web of it, and she felt something settle in her chest. Not anger. Something colder and more useful than anger. She picked up her phone again and called Judge Heather Harriet. It rang twice. Heather picked up. No surprise in her voice, no irritation at the hour. Just, "Tell me." Maggie told her everything. When she finished, Heather was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "File the countermotion by 8 a.m., she said. "I'll make sure the right eyes are on it by 9. Maggie hung up. She pulled a fresh legal pad in front of her, and she began to write. The gas station was the only thing open at that hour. It sat at the corner of Route 9 and Millard Street, buzzing under its own fluorescent lights, like a small, ugly sun in the middle of all that darkness. Maggie pulled in at 5:48 a.m., cut the engine, and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. Outside, the sky was just beginning to think about changing. Not light yet, not fully dark, that in-between gray that couldn't commit to either. She was running on 3 hours of sleep, and a vending machine coffee that had done very little except remind her what real coffee was supposed to taste like. Her counter-motion was filed. Dwayne had sent the last of the sourced documentation at 4:30 a.m., with a message that said simply, "Bulletproof." Judge Harriet had confirmed the hearing was set. Everything that could be done before 8 o'clock had been done, which left one thing. She went inside and bought 2 coffees, real ones, from the machine behind the counter that at least had the decency to be hot. She carried them back to her car, set them carefully in the cup holder, and drove east toward the apartment complex on the edge of Hardin County. She knocked on apartment 214 at 6:11 a.m. She half expected no answer. She had prepared herself for that. She would wait on the landing if she had to. She would wait as long as it took. But the door opened after less than a minute. Destiny stood in the doorway in the same gray sweatshirt as before, her eyes tired and swollen in the specific way of someone who had cried themselves to sleep and woken up too early. She looked at Maggie, then at the 2 coffees, then back at Maggie. She stepped aside without a word and let her in. The apartment was quiet. The little girl was still asleep. The kitchen table had a half-finished coloring book on one end and a stack of unopened mail on the other, the kind of mail people stop opening when they already know what's inside. Maggie set one of the coffees in front of the chair across from her and sat down. Destiny wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at the table. "They put my record out there," she said. Her voice was flat, scraped clean. "I was 15 years old. It was a bottle of nail polish." She shook her head slowly. "They took that, and they put it on the internet, and called me a criminal." "I know. So now everybody who looks me up, every employer, every landlord, that's what they're going to see." She looked up. "How is that different from what Parson did to me the first time?" It was a fair question. Maggie didn't flinch from it. "It isn't different," she said. "It's the same tactic. Find something. Weaponize it. Make you feel like you have no right to stand up." She paused. "But here's what it also is. It's desperation. If they weren't afraid of you, Destiny, they wouldn't have bothered. They went looking for something to use against a 19-year-old girl, because a 19-year-old girl is the thing that scares them most right now." Destiny was quiet, listening in the way she had listened on the doorstep, pretending not to, but taking in every word. Maggie set her coffee down. "I'm going to tell you something I have never told anyone I've worked with," she said. "Not in over 20 years of practice." Destiny looked at her. "When I was 22 and just starting out, I was the only black woman at my firm. Senior partners asked me to refill the coffee in client meetings. I was sent to the wrong entrance more than once. I worked nights for 3 years to get through law school, while people half as qualified walked straight through doors that stayed closed for me." She let that sit for a moment. "I made state attorney before I turned 40. And, last Tuesday, a deputy put me against my own car in a courthouse parking lot and took my briefcase like I was nobody." She looked directly at Destiny. "They will always make us prove we belong. That will not stop. The only question is whether we make them prove they deserve to get away with it." The apartment was very still. From the back room came the small, soft sounds of a 2-year-old beginning to stir. Destiny looked toward the sound. She stayed there for a long moment, her eyes on the hallway, her hands around the coffee cup. Something moved across her face, quiet and certain and final. She looked back at Maggie. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." She filed at 7:58 a.m., 2 minutes to spare. Not because she had been cutting it close. The counter motion had been ready since 5 in the morning, but because she had spent the last hour reading it one final time, line by line, the way a carpenter runs their hand along a joint before the house goes up, looking for anything soft, anything that could be pushed on, finding nothing. She hit submit and set the phone down. Dwayne looked up from across the table. She nodded once. He exhaled. By 9 o'clock, exactly as Judge Heather Harriet had promised, the recusal hearing was on the docket. Courtroom 4. That afternoon. The presiding judge was a woman named the Honorable Penelope Danforth, a federal appointee from the Northern District with no prior cases in Hardin County and no recorded connection to anyone in it. Maggie read her biography twice on the drive over. Good. Clean. No loose threads. Courtroom 4 was small and full by the time Maggie walked in. The sheriff's legal team was already seated at the respondents' table. 2 attorneys in expensive suits who had the coordinated, well-rested look of people who had billed significant hours preparing for this morning and fully expected it to go their way. In the gallery behind them sat Rocky Parson, his big frame settled into a wooden bench like he owned it, which in this county he probably believed he did. He watched Maggie cross the room with flat, steady eyes. She did not look at him. She set her briefcase on the table, opened it, and began arranging her exhibit folders in order. 12 of them. Labeled. Tabbed. Every connection between Luke Callister and the Parson family reduced to a document with a source citation and a case reference number. Dwayne sat beside her, his own copy of the exhibit set open in front of him. Judge Danforth entered at precisely 1 o'clock. The room stood and sat. "We're here on a motion to recuse State Attorney Margaret Coster from case number 2024 CR 1187, Judge Danforth said. Her voice was crisp and businesslike. She looked at the sheriff's table. "Counsel, you filed the motion. Make your argument." The lead attorney for the sheriff's team was a man named Green, and he was good. Maggie gave him that. He laid out the argument cleanly. The Bar Association dinner, Callister's affidavit, the personal nature of Maggie's arrest, the appearance of bias. He used the word compromised 4 times in 6 minutes. He used the phrase conflict of interest twice. He was building toward something, and near the end of his argument, he got there. "Your Honor," Green said, his tone shifting into something almost sympathetic. "Ms. Coster is a capable attorney, but she is relatively early in her tenure as state attorney. This situation, being personally arrested by the defendant, would test the objectivity of any prosecutor. For someone at her stage of experience, the appearance of personal grievance is simply too significant to ignore." Judge Danforth looked at Maggie. Response. Maggie stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform outrage. She simply opened Exhibit 1 and placed it on the bench in front of the judge. "This is a copy of the Hardin County Sheriff's Department personnel roster," she said. "Highlighted on page 3 is the name Miles Warden, active sergeant, 6 years of service. Miles Warden is the son-in-law of retired Judge Luke Callister, whose sworn affidavit forms the entire basis of this recusal motion." She placed Exhibit 2 beside it. "These are the public financial disclosure records from Sheriff Rocky Parson's annual fundraising events for the past 5 years. Judge Callister's name appears in the donor records for 4 consecutive years. Exhibit 3. These are the original case dockets for complainants 4 and 7 in case number 2024 CR 1187. The presiding judge on both original hearings, the judge who signed off on both plea agreements, was Luke Callister. She looked at Judge Danforth steadily. The man whose affidavit claims I am too personally compromised to pursue justice has his son-in-law employed by the defendant's department, his name on the defendant's fundraiser donor list, and his signature on 2 of the plea agreements this prosecution intends to challenge. She paused. That affidavit is not a professional assessment. It is obstruction. When opposing counsel rose to revisit the argument about her experience and tenure, Maggie reached into her briefcase and placed her 20-year service record quietly on the bench without a single word. She sat down. Judge Danforth read for 4 minutes in complete silence. Then she looked up. The motion to recuse is denied in full. Her voice was flat and final. Furthermore, I am referring Judge Callister's affidavit to the State Judicial Conduct Commission for formal review. From the gallery came the sound of a large man getting to his feet. Rocky Parson was standing. His face had gone the dark, mottled red of a man who had never once been told no by anything with a robe on. His mouth was open. His attorney grabbed his arm and pulled him down hard. Judge Danforth looked at the gallery once. This hearing is adjourned. The trial began on a Monday. Courtroom 2 was larger than Courtroom 4, and by 8:30 in the morning, every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters, community members, 3 representatives from national civil rights organizations who had flown in the week before and stayed. Councilwoman Olson sat in the second row with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes forward. Dustin Parson sat at the defense table in a dark suit that looked like it had been bought for the occasion. His attorney, a different one from the recusal hearing, older, more seasoned, sat beside him. Parson's jaw was set, and his posture was rigid, the performance of a man trying to look like he had nothing to worry about. Maggie sat at the prosecution table with Dwayne beside her, and 12 exhibit folders stacked in order. Judge Danforth entered. The room stood and sat, and then it began. Maggie called her witnesses in sequence, building the way she always built, slowly, deliberately, each piece of testimony adding one more layer to the foundation beneath it. The first 3 witnesses were women from the complaint list, whose cases were the most clearly documented. Each one took the stand and told her story in plain, simple language. Different names, different dates, different parking lots and pretexts. But the shape of each story was identical. The approach, the language, suspicious behavior, failure to comply, obstruction, delivered in the same order every time. Like a script Parson had been running so long, he no longer needed to think about it. The escalation, the arrest, the pressure toward a plea deal from an overworked public defender who didn't have the hours to fight it. 3 women, 3 variations of the same story. By the second day, Maggie had called 5 more. A woman who had lost a nursing school application because of her record. A woman whose custody arrangement had been affected. A woman who had returned to the courthouse the morning after her arrest to file a complaint and been told by the desk officer, one of Parsons' colleagues, that she should probably let it go. By the 3rd day, the jury had heard from 9 of the 11 complainants. They had seen the pattern written in testimony the way Maggie had first seen it written in margins, not as accident or coincidence, but as a deliberate repeating machine that had been running for 3 years inside a department where the right last name made you untouchable. Parsons' attorney cross-examined each witness with the same strategy. Small inconsistencies in dates, minor variations in recalled dialogue, the suggestion that each woman had contributed to her own escalation by failing to immediately comply. It was competent work. It landed on nothing. On the 4th day, Maggie called Destiny McAdam. The courtroom went very still. Destiny walked to the stand in a dark blue blouse and pressed slacks that Maggie suspected she had borrowed from someone. She sat down. She placed her hands flat on the rail in front of her, looked at Maggie, and nodded once. She was composed. That was the thing. After everything, the leaked record, the blog post, the weeks of fear and the 6 a.m. conversation at a kitchen table, she was composed in a way that was not performed or forced. She was simply present, steady, ready. Maggie walked her through it carefully. The morning of the arrest, a Tuesday in March, a parking lot outside the county social services office where Destiny had gone to inquire about child care assistance. Parsons' approach, his language, her attempts to explain herself, the handcuffs, the charge. The public defender who told her in a 10-minute hallway conversation that she had no realistic chance of winning and should take the deal. The housing voucher she lost. The job she lost. The conversation with her mother at the kitchen table, trying to explain why her name was now attached to a criminal record when she had done nothing wrong. Her daughter, 8 months old at the time, asleep in the next room while that conversation happened. Destiny's voice stayed even through all of it. Then Maggie asked her one final question. Ms. McAdam, in the time since your conviction, has a single day passed where that record has not affected your life in some way? Destiny looked at Dustin Parson. She found his face across the courtroom and held it, steady, unflinching for a long and complete moment, before she answered. No, she said, not one. Maggie turned to the bench. The prosecution rests. The jury was out for 3 hours. When they filed back in, the foreperson, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, stood and looked at the bench. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. Courtroom 2 again. Same gallery, same rows of faces. Some of them the same people who had been there for the verdict, back to see it finished. Councilwoman Olson was in the second row. Tanya, the courthouse clerk, who had raised her phone in a cold parking lot 7 weeks ago and started all of this moving, sat 3 seats to her left. Dustin Parson stood before the bench in the same dark suit. He looked smaller than he had at the start of the trial. Not physically. He was the same broad-shouldered man who had crossed a parking lot with his thumbs in his belt like the whole county belonged to him. But something had gone out of him. The easy certainty. The settled, untouchable look of a man who had never once faced a consequence. It was gone now. Judge Danforth looked down at him from the bench with the same flat, businesslike expression she had worn through every hour of these proceedings. She did not editorialize. She did not make a speech. She read the sentence in a clear, even voice. 18 months in federal prison. 3 years probation upon release. Permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification, effective immediately. He would never carry a badge again. Parson's attorney placed a hand on his arm. Parson did not react. He stood and took it, the way a man takes something he has finally run out of road to avoid. Maggie sat at the prosecution table and watched him be led out, and she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in 7 weeks. Not triumph, something quieter than that. Something that settled into her chest, like a door closing softly on a room that had been left open too long. The rest came quickly. That same Friday, 5 o'clock, the very last hour of the working week, Sheriff Rocky Parsons' office issued a press release announcing his resignation. Effective immediately, citing a desire to spend more time with his family. It was 3 sentences long. It answered nothing. It was the political equivalent of leaving through a back door and hoping nobody was watching. Everybody was watching. The Department of Justice, whose investigation had been quietly widening since the trial began, confirmed within the week that a federal grand jury had been seated to examine the broader conduct of the Hardin County Sheriff's Department. Rocky Parsons' name was in the first paragraph of their public statement. Judge Luke Callister received his formal censure from the State Judicial Conduct Commission on a Tuesday morning, a document entered into the public record and copied to every judicial appointment board in the state. His affidavit was formally designated as evidence of attempted obstruction and entered into the federal case file. A man who had spent 30 years on the bench had his legacy reduced to a footnote in someone else's corruption. Destiny. McAdams' conviction was vacated on a Wednesday afternoon. Maggie was in her office when Dwayne forwarded her the confirmation. She read it once, set her phone down, and sat quietly for a moment. A 19-year-old woman who had done nothing wrong now had nothing on her record. The housing voucher. The job. The years of walking around under the weight of something she had never earned. All of it, officially, undone. It wasn't everything. It couldn't give Destiny back the time, or the sleep, or the conversation at the kitchen table with her mother. But it was real. It was documented. It was permanent. The state legislature, under sustained national pressure and with 3 cameras pointed at them at all times, passed an expedited relief process within 30 days. All 10 remaining complainants had their records cleared before the end of the calendar year. Councilwoman Olson hosted a public ceremony at the Hardin County Community Center and read all 11 names aloud from the podium. Slowly, one by one, the way names deserve to be read when someone has finally decided they matter. Tanya stood in the front row and cried without any apparent concern for who saw her do it. That evening, Maggie's office was quiet. Dwayne arrived with 2 takeout containers and set one on her desk without ceremony. He dropped into the chair across from her and pulled the lid off his food and looked at her the way he had looked at her across that conference room table 7 weeks ago, with the particular focus of someone who already knows the next move and is waiting to hear it, said out loud. "What do you want to do next?" he said. Maggie reached into her desk drawer. She pulled out a fresh legal pad, clean, unmarked, every page still blank, and set it on the desk between them. She looked at it for a moment. "There are 22 other counties in this circuit," she said. Dwayne's face broke into a slow, wide grin. Maggie picked up her pen. "If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day."